Oh my goodness, I had myself muted. Well, let me start again, my dear scholars. Hello, hello, hello. Greetings, salutations, konnichiwa, and every other form of welcome across this vast, wonderful multiverse. I am Matsu Quinox. This is Horus, and welcome, my spectacular scholars, to Halloween. It seems we're already haunted, can't you tell? We're coming live to you from the Shadow Ballroom, where, as you can see, a party is already on its way. I hope all you scholars are doing alright on this haunting night. It comes but once a year, a night of ghouls, ghosts, and spirits. Cool skeleton, happy Horus noises. Ah, yes, yes, Horus got his hand on a treat. I am happy for him. Um, I was invited here, as you see, to be the entertainment. I would, for one thing, I would like to warn you, my dear scholars, that the guests behind me, please do not do direct eye contact with them. They get a little bit skittish when they're looked upon. Sophia Ignace, welcome, welcome, welcome. Ah, you're adorable, Matsu. Ah, thank you, thank you. I am wearing my costume for this evening. Although the eye on my chest is not the costume. There are many secrets about ourselves that we tend to hide from others. Dr. Zadium, welcome. Cool Skeleton, welcome. And Julian20, welcome, welcome, welcome. Ah, yes. Ah, I love this evening. It is a wonderful night of stories. Stories of fright, stories of chills, stories of spirits, unsettled and unresting. I was asked here to provide the entertainment, and as I will announce, I shall be reading several stories. Tales from bygone eras, tales of fright, tales of horror, tales of surprise. Sophia Ignace, trick or treat! Oh! Oh! A trick or treater, I see! Oh my goodness, I think I have some candy somewhere. There you are. Ah, hello, Private Merrick. Nice suit. Why, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I think it's fairly spooktacular. I am terrible at puns. Ah, well, yes indeed, yes indeed. Ah, I have gotten word from our dear partygoers that they wish to hear stories. Do you wish to hear stories, my dear scholars? Are you willing to listen in on the tales I tell? Dr. Zadium, yes. Ah, a brave soul I see, one not afraid to face the horrors that lie beyond. Alright, very well. Maestro, would you mind turning down the music just a little bit? Ah, yes. Thank you, my dear Maestro. Much appreciated. Cool Skeleton can't have no Halloween without a cool skeleton, indeed. Indeed, and we shall hear a story about a skeleton tonight. Ah, thank you, Sophia Ignace. Thank you, thank you, thank you for the gift. Did sub. I hope you enjoyed Private Maverick. I hope you enjoyed, and I must also thank Scuzzy Goosey for having followed me. Yes, indeed. All right, very well, my dear, dear scholars. Let us sit back, enjoy ourselves, dim the lights if you can, and I will begin our frightful journey into the world of the beyond. uh, let us see. There are many tales I can tell. Ah, very well. I am ready. The Mouse Tower, Germany. In the middle of the Rhine River, near the city of Bingen, there has stood for hundreds of years a fortified rock topped by a large tower, called the Mausturm, or Mouse Tower. Legend has long held that this was the scene of a terrible punishment sent by God upon a bishop who betrayed the faithful in his care. In the year 970, Germany suffered from a terrible famine. In desperation, people were reduced to eating dogs and cats, and still countless numbers died of hunger. At this time, Hatto II was bishop of the region. Every day the starving poor would crowd around his door begging for bread. It was widely known that he had plentiful supplies of grain set aside from the good harvest the year before. But the bishop refused to part with the mounds of grain locked away in his bulging storehouses. His only thought was to increase his personal fortune. From the high window of his palace he would watch poor people fainting from hunger on the streets, and storming the bread market, where they would take the bread by force. The bishop felt no pity at all for these starving people. But he soon grew weary of their cries day and night, as they crowded around his palace walls, begging for a crust of bread, a handful of corn. At last, the bishop decided to quiet the mob. From his window, he announced to them, "Let all your poor and needy gather in my great barn outside the city. There I shall feed you." So it was that, from all directions, from near and far, a desperate army of hungry folk flocked to the bishop's barn. Loudly they sang the bishop's praises, while his soldiers urged them into the barn. When the vast wooden structure could hold no more, the treacherous bishop ordered his soldiers to seal the doors. Then he had his men set fire to the barn, and burned the unfortunates, young and old, men and women. When the flames were at their highest, and the agonized cries were loudest, Hatto said, "Hear, hear, how the mice squeak! In faith, 'tis an excellent bonfire. The country is greatly obliged to me for ridding it of such mice who would only consume our precious corn." The shouts and screams for mercy seemed to hang in the air long after the barn was reduced to nothing more than smoking embers. Afterward, content with his day's work, the wicked man returned to his palace. There he sat down merrily to supper, and afterwards slept the night like an innocent man. But God soon saw to it that Bishop Hatto never slept again. The very next morning the bishop discovered his palace was infested with mice. They scurried down corridors and crawled over his feet while he took his ease or tried to read. They fouled the food in his larder and chewed his books and papers. Oh, goodness me. They bit anyone who tried to drive them away. No efforts on his part could free Bishop Hatto from their torments. When he entered his great hall, he discovered that the mice had eaten his portrait out of its frame. The rectangle of splintered wood held only a few tatters of canvas. A short time later, a frightened farm servant reported to him that mice had devoured all the corn in his granary. Cool Skeleton, quick, hide horse. Oh, yes, horse. What do you mean you made a deal? Ah, I should have known, I should have known. You would be that sort. Immediately thereafter, a second terrified messenger arrived and reported that a huge tide of mice was scurrying towards his palace. Rushing to his window, the bishop could see the roads and fields dark with the advancing army. The vast horde of mice was chewing remorselessly through both hedge and wall as the creatures made straight for the palace. The sound of their shrieking and squeaking chilled him to the heart. Full of terror, Bishop Hatto escaped through the rear gate and commanded his men to row him out to his tower in the middle of the Rhine River. There he ordered his servants to bar every entrance. But the mice followed him. They swam across the river, clambered up the rock, and crawled through every crack and crevice of the battlements. Swarming over the tower, they chewed their way in by the thousands, through oaken doors and plank floors and wooden ceilings. And when they had cornered the wicked bishop, they climbed, dropped, and leapt upon him from all sides. As one old poem has it, they whetted their teeth against the stones, and then they picked the bishop's bones. They gnawed the flesh from every limb, for they were sent to punish him. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the swarms of mice disappeared. Many people were convinced that the animals were really the souls of those the bishop had so cruelly slain. The mouse turret remains a place of fearful fascination. It is rumored that one can still hear the ghostly cries of the wretched bishop and the chittering of hordes of unseen mice on the anniversary of the fatal barn fire. Oh, that dear bishop. I think he learned his lesson a little too late. Wow, indeed, Julian 20. Wow, indeed. Let us continue our journey now through the darkness and the shadow. Cool Skeleton, don't burn people in barns. Oh, yes, yes. It's always quite a very bad idea to do so. You will find in many of these stories tales of vengeance from beyond the grave, such as our next story, The Headrest, Papua New Guinea. In the old days, it happened that Ine, a man from the hills, came to a certain village, leading his little son by the hand. He spent the day trading with the villagers and talking with them. His boy, Mimau, sat beside him, silent and smiling shyly. People remarked what a well-behaved child he was, a blessing to his father and mother. The women kindly gave father and son taro. bananas, plantains, and sugar cane to eat. When darkness fell, the stranger went into the Putuma, the common house, where the men slept to spend the night. He took his son with him, but in the Putuma was Kakak, a man of the village who was short-tempered and violent. When he saw the hill man's child about to fall asleep beside his father, Kakak raised a great cry. While two of Kakak's friends held the hill man in check, the angry villager shook Mamau. "What are you doing here, boy?" he cried. "Don't you know that this is a house for men? Go away at once!" Then Kakak beat the little child and shoved him out of the door into the dirt beyond. The boy lay still. His spirit had fled his body. Ine also was expelled from the Putuma. When he saw the lifeless form of his son, he gave a cry that echoed from the distant hills. Then wordlessly, he gathered the body of his little Mamau in his arms and walked away into the night. At this, Kakak boasted, "That is how I will deal with all strangers who do not respect our customs." Then, contented, he lay down to sleep. Only a few days after this, it happened that all the people of the village were fishing at the river, so no one noticed Ine creep into the empty Putuma. When the hill man entered, he carried something in his hands, but when he left, his hands were empty. Still unseen, Ine hurried back to the hills. At evening, the men of the village returned. After they had eaten, they went into Putuma and made ready to sleep, for they were weary after a day spent fishing. In the center of the sleeping place, Kakak saw a headrest, carved of wood. Instantly he claimed it for his own, saying, "This is my pillow. If any of you wish it, you may take it from me in a wrestling match, if you dare." But the other men, knowing his fierceness and strength, refused to wrestle with him. They just shrugged and let him be. Then Kakak lay down, rested his neck on the carved wooden headrest, and was soon asleep. In the morning the men awoke, stretched, and one by one came out of the Putuma into the village. But Kakak was not among them. It surprised the others that he was still sleeping, for he was usually the first to arise. After a time one man went in and tried to rouse the fierce man. But when he looked closely, he saw that Kakak was dead. Then he made a great outcry, calling to the other men. When they saw the body, the men were very much afraid. "How could he have died so quickly and quietly?" they asked each other. "Surely he was bewitched." Kakak was buried, and his name was no longer spoken aloud, as was the custom when someone died. But the man who had first tried to wake him took the headrest for himself. It chanced that he was one of the two who had held back the hill man while Kakak beat his child. That night he lay down to sleep, and in the morning he was also found dead. What evil comes to the Batuma at night that kills men so swiftly? The villagers wondered fearfully. Let us watch all through the night to see what shape our enemy takes. So the men sat up all through the night, but they saw nothing. In the morning they went wearily about their business, unsure whether the evil had truly gone away, or was merely waiting to strike again when they might be less watchful. In the warmth of the afternoon, one man crept back to the Batuma to sleep, while all his fellows were fishing. As it happened, this was the second of the two men who had held the hill man while his child was beaten. Seeing the head rest in a corner, he placed it under his neck, sighed contentedly, and was soon fast asleep. Now his fellows, noticing that he was gone from the river bank, sent a boy to fetch him. The child had just reached the entrance to Batuma when he saw the headrest slide out from under the sleeping man, fly into the air, then fall with great force on the sleeper's head. The man lay dead upon the ground with the headrest beside him, before the child could so much as cry out a warning. Fearful that the thing might fall on his own head, the boy ran back to the river, shouting to tell everyone what he had seen. For a long time, the men remained outside the common house, staring at the slain man's body and the headrest beside it. After much discussion, they gathered as much wood as possible and built a great fire in the open space outside the Batuma. Then the strongest and bravest man went inside and picked up the headrest. To the touch, it seemed nothing more than ordinary wood. But when he neared the bonfire, the headrest began to twist about in his grip, as though it would break free. With a cry partially of fear and partially of disgust, the man cast the headrest into the hottest part of the flames. Instantly the wood caught fire. Then, as the villagers watched aghast, it writhed and crawled about the pyre as if it were truly alive. All the while it groaned, "Aka, aka, 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 aka," and screamed, "Aka, aka, aka, aka," until it was burned to ashes. Then, from the heart of the dying fire, arose a whirlwind. It carried the ashes of the headrest high into the air. There other winds caught them and carried them across the river and over the trees towards the distant hills and a village high in the mountains. They would be a sign to Ine, watching silently from the door of his hut, that vengeance had been extracted for the violence done to his little son. They do say vengeance is a dish best served cold. My goodness, indeed, my goodness. Let us see. Let us read a classic tale of fear and horror, and one of greed and the greed that lies in all men's hearts. And let it be a lesson to all you scholars as well, to heed your own thoughts. Three who sought death. British Isles, England. From the works of Geoffrey Chaucer. There were three reckless fellows in a tavern one day, who chanced to see a funeral procession passing by. They sent the tavern boy to inquire who had died. The lad returned and told them, "It is an old friend of yours, Fondrok, who was slain by the thief named Death." "By heavens!" said the first fellow to his companions, "who is this Death that everyone is so afraid of him? Let us vow on the spot to go and find Death, and rid the world of him before nightfall." All three shook hands and agreed to seek out Death and put an end to his work. When they asked the tavern keeper where Death might be found, the man said, "Not far from here there is a village that has been ravaged by the plague. Men, women, and children, master and servant, have been claimed by Death. I am certain that you will find him there." So off they went to find the unhappy village. But when they had gone only a little way, the three met a poor old man. They made fun of his long gray beard, his wrinkled skin, and the staff that he leaned on for support. They barred his path and would not let him pass.
"Please let me go my way," the old man begged, "for Death is following me, and I must outrun him to stay alive."
"No, old wretch, we will not let you pass," the three said, "until you tell us where we can find Death. He has slain our friend, and now we mean to put an end to him."
"Good sirs," said the old man, "if you want to find Death, look under that oak tree yonder."
At this, the three fellows let the old man go his way. They hurried to the tree, where they found not Death, but a chest filled with gold coins. Down they sat to count their new-found treasure, and promptly forgot their vow to seek out Death. After a time, the first man said, "We must be careful with this gold, or people will say we stole it, and hang us as thieves. Let us draw straws. Whichever of us draws the shortest will go to town and bring us food. The other two shall keep watch over the gold. Then at night we will each take away with us an equal part of the treasure, when no man can see us and accuse us of thievery." This they agreed to, and accordingly drew straws. The shortest straw went to the youngest of the three, so they gave him a handful of gold coins, and off he went to town to get food. Meanwhile, the two left guarding the remainder of the treasure decided that as soon as their fellow returned, they would kill him, eat the food, and divide up the gold two ways instead of three. The youngest, as he walked to town, said to himself, "I could buy poison and put it in the food and slay my two companions. Then I would have all the treasure to myself." So he purchased a strong and violent poison and put it in the food and drink he bought, and carried these to his fellows. But his companions fell upon him and slew him the minute he returned. When they had buried his body, the first wretch said, "Now let us sit and eat and make merry, for we are wealthy men." Then they ate the food their friend had bought, and quickly died from the poison in it. So the three men found Death, whom they had been seeking, underneath the oak tree, just as the old man had promised. Yes, indeed, greed can be the end of many a man. It is wise to be cautious in one's mind. You know, many of these stories are about ghosts, but we have yet to encounter a beast, have we not? There's one creature that is often considered very popular during this month. This day, I should say. And this next tale, my dear scholars, concerns such a creature. The Crogland Grange Vampire. British Isles, England. Crogland Grange in Cumberland, England, had been owned by a family named Fisher for over 100 years. But in the last century, they moved out and rented the house to two brothers, Andrew and Gordon, and their sister, Emma. The threesome settled in easily enough and soon made many friends in the neighborhood. One hot summer day, when the sultry air made any kind of work impossible, the three dined early. Afterward, they sat out on the veranda, savoring the cooling air and watching the full moon rise and bathe the lawn and gardens in silver light. Cool Skeleton, I thought you were going to say werewolf. Ah, yes, that is another beast that is worthy of tales. At last they grew tired and went indoors to their separate rooms. Emma found the night still too warm for sleep. Leaving her shutters open and mounding the pillows behind her, she sat up in her bed, watching the moon through her ground floor window. Gradually, she became aware of two tiny lights that flickered in and out of the row of trees that separated the Grange's lawn from the village churchyard beyond. At first they seemed nothing more than fireflies to the young woman, but as she continued to stare at them, she saw them drawing nearer. To her surprise, they seemed to be embedded in a darker shadow, which had detached itself from the moon-cast shadows under the trees. Emma's hand went to her throat as she realized that something was approaching the house and growing larger the nearer it came. From time to time the dark shape was swallowed up by the shadows of trees on the lawn, but it always re-emerged, larger than before, and coming closer, closer. Emma was filled with horror. At first she wanted to cry out, but her throat felt paralyzed. Then she dreaded making the least sound or movement, for fear that the thing outside the French doors would be drawn by it. She was sure that the pitiful barrier of glass panes and thin wooden sashes would not deter it for an instant. Suddenly, for no reason that the terrified woman could guess, the shape turned aside. She had the impression that it was going around the house, instead of moving straight toward her. The moment the tall, dark figure was out of sight, Emma leaped from her bed and ran to the hall door. Just as her fingers circled the knob, however, she heard a blood-chilling scratch, scratch, scratch at the window. Turning, she saw a hideous brown face with flaming eyes glaring in at her. The thing rattled the French windows, which were securely locked on the inside. Emma was relieved to see that the flimsy-looking panels might keep it at bay. She tried to open the bedroom door to escape into the hall beyond, but the antique latch jammed, trapping her in the room. The creature outside scratched again at the glass. Then it began to peck with its nails at the sash. Emma saw that it was scraping out the lead that held the window panes in place. Again she tried to scream, but only a soft moan escaped her lips. A single diamond-shaped pane fell inward and shattered on the floor. A long bony finger snaked through, found the catch on the window, and flicked it open. Emma lurched towards the bed, hoping to reach the closet beyond, but the creature burst into the room, grabbed her hair with its long fingers, and dragged her down so that her head hung over the side of the bed. Then it leaned over and bit her on the throat. The sting released her voice, and she at last began to scream aloud as she struggled to push the awful face away from her. She heard her brothers shouting and banging on the door. At this, the monster suddenly fled from the room. When Andrew and Gordon found the door would not budge, they slammed themselves against it, throwing it open by sheer force. Inside, they found their sister bleeding from a wound in the throat and unconscious. Past the open French windows, nothing moved upon the moonlit lawn at first. Then Gordon cried, "I see him!" He pointed to a tall figure that fled from the shadows under a large oak. Without hesitation he pursued it, but the monster moved twice as fast, with long loping strides, and quickly leaped over the wall into the churchyard. By the time Gordon had reached the fieldstone wall, he could see nothing beyond but gravestones and vaults. His quarry had vanished. Frustrated and angry, he returned to his sister's room. There he found that Emma had regained consciousness, while Andrew dabbed at her wound with a damp towel. "We shall keep watch the rest of the night," Andrew was saying. "In the morning we will take the first train back to London."
"Andrew, here's Gordon," the young woman said. "Did you find out who or what attacked me?"
"No," her brother confessed. "It escaped into the churchyard. But whoever the devil it was, Andrew is right. We must leave here as quickly as possible." But Emma shook her head.
"I will not let this experience drive us from the house where we have been so happy."
Though her brothers tried to persuade her to leave, Emma refused.
"We have leased this house for 7 years," she said, "and we have been here less than 1. We cannot afford to move elsewhere while paying rent on this place."
Her brothers uneasily agreed with the logic of her argument. The next morning the local constable helped them decide when he suggested, "It must have been a lunatic, escaped from some asylum." Then he added with great authority, "He is not likely to return." So they stayed at Crogling Grange, but Andrew and Emma switched rooms. Emma kept her shutters closed fast at night, and each of her brothers kept a loaded pistol in his room. The winter passed uneventfully enough, but the following March, Emma was suddenly awakened by a dreadful scratching at the shutters. Looking up, she saw the same brown, shriveled face staring back at her through the one pane at the top of the window left uncovered by the shutters. She screamed as loud as she could, and her brothers rushed out of the house with drawn pistols. They spotted the creature loping away across the lawn. Andrew fired and hit it in the leg, but it got away, scrambling over the graveyard wall. This time, the brothers reached the wall quickly enough to see the dark form disappear into a neglected vault. The next day, in the presence of the tenants of Crogland Grange, the constable and several other local authorities, the vault was opened. Inside, they discovered that all the coffins had been broken apart and their contents scattered across the floor. Only one coffin lay intact, though its lid was loose. Andrew and Gordon, at the constable's direction, raised the coffin lid. Then Emma gasped, for there inside was the brown and withered figure that had twice appeared to her at the Grange. Further investigation revealed that one leg of the corpse had been damaged by a pistol shot. Though no one said the dreaded word vampire aloud, by common agreement, they did the only thing that can lay such a creature to rest. They burned the body to ashes. After this, there were no more disturbances at Crogland Grange. Ah, yes, this is a time for monsters, vampires, werewolves, and the like. Such creatures of the night are quite frightening, I would think, to those who would believe in such things. Our next story is one for which I have been told there was a request for. A story from the further north, and a story once more of ghostly visitors in the night. Cool Skeleton, the most famous vampire I know is Dio Brando. Ah! Dio Brando, yes. Though I understand to face him is quite useless. The Ghost's Cap, from a Russian folktale. Julian 20, by the way, I love your eye costume. Why, thank you, thank you. I've been told it's quite a sight. Again, I'm terrible at puns. Cool Skeleton, I like the way it looks. Oh, yes, yes. It's quite a sight for sore eyes. I get it. Ah, the puns are unleashed, the puns. Where were we? Ah, yes. The Ghost's Cap from a Russian folktale. In a certain village, there was a girl who was as full of mischief as she was lazy. Though her mother and father would nag at her to help with the cooking or mending or sweeping, she would slip away to meet with her friends, who were as useless as she was. They would sit on the banks of the river, gossiping and chattering away, while their mothers washed the clothes and spread them on the bank to dry near the churchyard. One day, Anya and her friends began talking about who was the boldest. The boasting went on until Anya finally declared, "I'm not afraid of anything." "Well, then," said one young man, Ivan, "if you're not afraid, go at midnight to the graveyard. My father and uncle say there's a ghost who sits on a tombstone there from the stroke of midnight until the first light of morning. Go, make the ghost tell you its name, and I'll believe that no one is as brave as you. And I'll give you the silver buttons off my jacket that you've admired for so long." "Oh, those," said the greedy girl with a toss of her braids. "I'd have to have more than them to go to the churchyard at midnight and meet a ghost." In fact, she did not believe there was any ghost, because she knew that the young man's father and uncle were notorious for the amount of vodka they drank. They were often seen spirits in the night after they downed too many glasses of liquor. "If you'll do it, I'll give you 2 lengths of lace," said one girl. "And I'll give you 20 kopecks," offered another girl. Soon Anya had extracted promises for all sorts of things from her friends. She vowed to go to the graveyard that very night, at the stroke of midnight, and force the ghost to tell her its name. When she went home that evening, her mother grumbled, "The dust is piling up in the corners of every room because you won't do your sweeping." So, of course, good night, everyone. See you next time. Yes, good night, and have a pleasant dreams. Excuse me. "Soon," said Anya, taking out her favorite embroidered jacket and beginning to cut off all the wooden buttons, thinking how grand Ivan's silver ones would look in their stead. Her father cleared his throat impatiently. "You'd be better off learning to cook a decent meal and do an honest day's work than worrying about how you look. You'll die a pauper in rags if you don't have a care." "Never," said the girl, thinking about the lace and kopecks and other things her cleverness would win her this night. Her parents just threw up their hands and shook their heads at each other. "Ah, welcome, Firefly, welcome. You're just in time for a tale from the northern lands." The Ghost's Cap. Shortly before midnight, when her mother and father were asleep, Anya pulled on her shawl and slipped out of the cottage. She planned to walk to the edge of the churchyard because she knew some of her friends would be watching from their windows to be sure that she was doing what she promised. When she got there, she intended to turn right around and come home. In the morning she would tell her friends the ghost was the ghost of old Peter, who had died the spring before. That would satisfy them, and they would have to give her the things they had promised. So she strolled to the crumbling low stone wall around the cemetery. She pushed her way through the rusting gate. The full moon shone brightly, filling the place with pale light. Cool skeleton. Speaking of ghost caps, that top hat is pretty floaty. Yes, it is. I have a little bit of a help with it. I think it works better and looks much more spooky when it's floating. honestly. Mhm. It gives a little bit of air to my head, and it makes for a good decoration. You never know when you need a flying top hat. The full moon shone brightly, filling the place with pale light. Just inside, she saw what looked like a corpse, dressed in white from head to foot, sitting on a tombstone. Anya wasn't the least bit afraid. She thought it was Yvonne playing a trick on her. So she ran up to the figure and, pulling the cap off it, shouted, "You won't frighten me!" The ghostly figure held its peace, never uttering a word. "Are you a ghost waiting for the stroke of midnight to speak?" she teased. "Or are you the boy who will have no silver buttons on his jacket in the morning?" Laughing, she ran back through the moon-splashed streets. When she got home, she looked closer at her prize, and found it was a moldy white cap, half filled with loose earth. "Ugh!" she cried, tossing it into a dusty corner of her room. Then she blew out the candle and climbed into bed. 3 times she came awake, thinking she heard someone tapping at the window. In the rising wind, she thought she heard a voice whispering, "Give me back my cap. Give me back my cap." But each time she relit the candle, and threw open the shutters, she discovered only darkness. Finally, she slept soundly until the morning. Cool skeleton bro, just clean off the cap. Why you gotta be rude? Indeed, indeed. The next day she met her friends on the riverbank. She told them she had gone to the churchyard the night before. The two girls admitted they had been, and the two girls and two girls admitted they had been spying on her, and indeed seen her walking down the lane towards the cemetery. "Did you meet the ghost?" asked Yvonne. "To be sure," Anya said. "It is the spirit of old Peter, who died last spring. He told me so himself. Then I snatched his cap as proof, and here it is." She held out the dirt-stained cap, enjoying the way her friends shuddered and pulled away from the trophy. Only Yvonne stretched out a finger to touch it. Anya tossed it at him, but he jerked away, so it fell into the grass between them. "Don't you want your cap back?" she teased, "since you lost it the last night." "I've never seen the thing before," said Yvonne. Then he reached into his pocket and dropped the silver jacket buttons into Anya's cupped hands. "You're a liar," she laughed, "but you pay your debts like an honest man." Then she gathered up the rest of her prizes from her friends and hurried back home to hide them away. She paused only long enough to crumple the white cap into a ball and toss it into the river. That night, long after everyone was asleep, in the hour just before dawn, there came an angry tapping at the shutter of Anya's bedroom window. "Give me back my cap," a voice moaned. But the girl, sleeping heavily and dreaming of silver buttons and lace, never woke up. But her mother did, and woke Anya's father. They opened the window and saw a ghastly figure in the moonlight.
What, what do you want?
Asked the mother, trembling.
My cap, which your daughter stole.
Just at that moment, the cocks began to crow, and the ghost disappeared. Anya's parents woke her up. "Foolish girl, what have you done?" demanded her father. Then he told her what he and her mother had seen from their window. "It's only Ivan," said Anya, pulling the bedclothes up around her head. "He's always pulling tricks." Her parents pleaded with her to give back the cap, but she said she had tossed it into the river on her way home, and that was that. Alarmed, the girl's father and mother sent for the village priest, told him about their horrible visitor, and begged him to help. "You can perform a service to rid us of this ghost, can't you?" they asked. The priest considered for a while, then told them to bring their daughter to church the next day. So on the following day, Anya was dragged to church, protesting loudly that she had buttons and lace to sew on her favorite coat. The priest had asked a number of villagers to come to add their prayers to help lay the troubled spirit to rest. Just as the service was nearly finished, a terrible whirlwind arose. The entire church was shaken, and everyone was hurled to the floor. But Anya was thrown down with even greater force. A single blood-curdling scream escaped from her lips. Then everything was silent, and the whirlwind was stilled. But when the terrified people picked themselves up and looked toward the altar, there, on the bottom step, where Anya had been kneeling, was nothing but a single braid of her hair and one silver jacket button. An excellent lesson to others: never take from the dead. Cool skeleton, she kinda deserves her fate. Oh, yes, yes. Her greed and selfishness surely did end up being the end of her. These next two tales tell the prices one pays for meddling in dark arts and those who face such things. Cool skeleton disrespecting a hat like that? For shame. Yes, for shame. For shame, for shame, for shame. The Witch Cat. Folklore of the United States. Virginia. One windy March day back in 1850, a handsome young man, whose wife had died the year before, arrived in a small Virginia town. He brought with him his young daughter, a wagon full of household goods and tools, and enough money to buy a small plot of land. The townsfolk were kind and showed him several parcels of land that were for sale. Before he decided, he went walking through the back country and found a nice parcel of piece of land beside a wide, still pond. When he asked about it, people said it wasn't owned by anybody. It had once belonged to a family that had left those parts after a string of misfortunes. No one said much, although they tried their best to get him to change his mind. But nothing would do except that land for his farm. The people in the neighborhood helped him get started. They had a house raising to build him a cabin, and a barn raising the following week. With the last of his money, he bought a horse, a cow, and several chickens. He worked hard clearing the land and getting the fields ready for planting. His daughter milked the cow and fed the chickens. They seemed happy enough, though the townsfolk told one another that such a fine man should get married pretty quick, to give himself the sort of companionship a man needs, and give his little girl a mother. Sometimes, when his day's work was done, the farmer would fish for a while on the banks of the pond, staring dreamily out across the waters that turned gold, then red, then purple as the sun set. One evening, at twilight, he saw a small skiff coming across the water, pulled by a tall, slender figure. The glare of the fading sun made it impossible for him to see whether it was a man or a woman on the water. But when the boat was nearer shore, he saw the stranger was wearing a bonnet. A moment later, as the skiff landed smoothly, a young woman's voice called out, "Hello, help me up, will you?" She extended a delicate hand, pale and fine as bone china, to him. Like a man in a dream, the farmer reached out and took it, helping her out of the boat and onto the shore. The woman pulled off her bonnet and shook her curly black hair free. "That feels more to my liking," she said. "All that rowing can really wear a body out." For a moment he didn't answer her. He was fascinated by her wide green eyes, pale skin, and lips as dainty and red as a rosebud. At last he remembered his manners, removed his hat, and said, "Oh, Tom Morgan at your service, ma'am. Are you lost?" "Oh, welcome, Pelson. I'm interested when I saw scary stories. Hi, welcome, welcome, welcome." "Not a bit," she said with a laugh. "My name is Eleanor Fay. I live over across the pond." She gestured towards the far side, where willows and cypresses were tangled together. "I figured it was time I called on my new neighbors." Still in a daze, Tom invited her up to see his cabin and barn, and meet his daughter, Effie. Eleanor oohed and awed as he pointed out the new house and barn, and the chicken coop with its coat of fresh paint. But when she reached out a hand to stroke Effie's hair, The child, clinging to her father's trouser leg, began to cry and wouldn't let the woman touch her.
Shy little thing, isn't she?
Said Eleanor, with a polite laugh that showed her white teeth. Tom, feeling badly, tried to get his daughter to apologize, but she ran away suddenly. Sorry about that, said Tom. She's not usually shy with strangers.
No matter, said Eleanor easily. We'll become good friends before long.
It was now nearly dark.
I have to be going,
The woman said.
next time I won't come by so late.
Tom walked her down to the shore. He offered to row her back across the pond, but she said,
No, I've been a widow for 5 years and do it for myself. I'll manage fine.
it seemed that her pole barely touched the water before the skiff slid quickly and silently toward the shadowed far shore. Tom stood staring for a long time until he could no longer see Eleanor or her boat in the gathering dark. Thank you for the follow, Pi Nelson. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is much appreciated. And welcome to our fellow group of scholars. Tom stood staring for a long time until he could no longer see Eleanor or her boat in the gathering dark. After that, Eleanor came almost every day to visit. Once she brought a jar of homemade preserves. Another time, it was a lace tablecloth. Tom was enchanted, but Effie hid if she could get away. If her father forced her to stay inside when Eleanor visited, she sulked in a corner, staying as far away from the smiling woman as possible. Eleanor would blink her green eyes, which seemed flecked with gold, as if she were holding back tears. But she always made a show of excusing the child's actions. When Effie's father asked her why she acted the way she did, Effie said,
I don't know. I just don't like her, Papa.
This bothered Tom a good deal, because he had fallen under the spell of the young woman, and was trying to work up nerve enough to ask her to marry him. He never went across the pond to her farm. She said she preferred to visit him and get away from her chores, and anything she said made sense to him. In addition to Effie being difficult, Tom was troubled by something getting at his chickens. Night after night, he would be aroused by a blood-curdling cat scream, followed by a fluttering and squawking from the chicken coop. Each time he ran out to see what the matter was, he'd find one or two of his chickens missing, and feathers scattered all around. Effie had bad dreams of a huge cat with blazing yellow-green eyes that climbed through the window of her room and curled up on the foot of her bed, waiting for her to go to sleep, so that it could suck the breath of life from her when she did. One morning, Tom found her barely breathing, and there was a round spot in the bedclothes at the foot of her bed, as if something, a cat maybe,
and curled up to sleep there. When Tom went into town to pick up supplies, the townsfolk took him aside and whispered to him that Eleanor was a witch who lived beside the pond because it was enchanted, having been sacred to the Indians who had lived there long before the white man had arrived. They also said she had done away with her husband by black magic, though no one was clear how this had been accomplished. The young farmer refused to believe them. "You're just jealous o' my good fortune," he said. Folks in town shrugged and went their own way. They knew what they knew. His daughter got more sickly, and Tom began to fear for her life. Desperate, he went to the neighborhood conjure man named Zeke Franklin. The old man was a white witch who helped people, especially those troubled by black magic. "I can't say for certain who's witching you," said Zeke, "but I'll give you something to help." He got a little bottle, and into it he put a dried snail, a mummified spider, and the toes from the left foot of a tree toad. He added a bit of bat's wing, then corked it, and tied a string around the neck of the bottle. "That'll do her, I reckon," said Zeke. "Next you take your hunting knife, whet it as sharp as a briar, and keep it under your pillow." Tom hung the bottle over Effie's bed that night, and from that moment on, she had no more nightmares. But he kept his hunting knife, honed to a razor's edge, under his pillow. In the morning, Eleanor came to visit him, and expressed disgust at the jar Zeke Franklin had given Tom. "That's foolishness," she said, sounding downright angry. "I don't have any patience with nonsense like that." While Tom tried to explain that the conjure man's jar had kept Effie from nightmares, Eleanor ran back to her skiff and pulled across the pond without ever once looking back at him. Frantic, Tom shouted after her, but she ignored him. In misery, he returned to his cabin, where Effie hugged him. That night, something got into the chickens again and tore them apart out of sheer meanness. "I may have lost a lot," Tom said angrily the next morning, "but I'm not going to lose any more, that's for sure." So he sent Effie into town to stay with neighbors. That night he moved the few remaining chickens into the barn and hid behind some grain bags near the window. He hadn't been in hiding long when he heard the wind rise, followed by a rumble of thunder. A minute later, rain began pounding on the roof shingles, while the wind howled through the cracks in the walls. Tom was a man not easily frightened, but the power of the storm began to make him uneasy. Then he heard a yowl that sent a thrill of terror up his back. A moment later, he heard a pounding on the doors, as if huge fists were beating upon it. Tom raised himself into a crouch. At the same moment, a monstrous cat with flashing yellow eyes leaped at him through the window of the barn. The man sliced the air with his knife to defend himself. The briar sharp blade caught the cat's right paw, severing it completely. The cat gave a shriek of pain, yellow eyes blazing. It fled back out through the window. Tom stumbled out of the barn like a man in a nightmare. A line of red drops led towards the shore. Though the rain was washing the trail away, he was able to follow it easily enough. At the water's edge, he saw the mark of a boat's prow in the mud. Far out, where the rain-pocked lake was lit by flashes of lightning, Tom saw a skiff skimming the black water towards the opposite shore. He shouted after it, but the wind and thunder drowned out his cries. In a moment he had launched his own boat and was rowing across the storm-lashed pond. The storm ended shortly before dawn. The neighbors who had care of Effie came to the farm later, when they had begun to wonder why Tom hadn't come to claim his daughter. Silence lay over the farm. The tracks of a man's boots led down to the shore of the pond, now silver in the late morning sunlight. Some brave villagers rowed across the lake at noon. On the far side, they found Tom, sprawled lifeless on the muddy shore. Clenched in his fist was the severed paw of a cat. In the rude cabin farther up the shore, they found Eleanor Fay, collapsed, face down on the floor. When they turned her over, they found she was dead, and her right hand was gone. Julian20, you knew it? Ah, you knew it. And to answer your question, Pi Nelson, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. These stories are from a collection called Short and Shivery. They're worth taking a look in. They're wonderful stories from across the world. Tales of terror and tales of horror. Folk tales, some of them older than you can know, and some urban legends as well. Let us continue, though. Ta- oh, I am so sorry. How Oh, goodbye, cool skeleton. Thank you for coming. How is it pronounced? So that I can make sure that I get it right next time. I want to make sure I get all my dear scholars' names right. Mhm. And I apologize for mispronouncing your name. Ah, just say Pin or Nelson, one of those, because this is hard, but it's fine. Ah, alright, alright. Let us continue our into another story of the consequences of dark magic. Billy Mosby's Night Ride. United States, New England. In the early 1800s, in a small town in a remote part of New York State, A young boy named Billy Mosby, whose parents had died, was raised by his grandparents, Enoch and Ann Mosby. Billy helped out on his grandparents' farm, getting up early to milk the cows and feed the pigs and gather the eggs. Though he sometimes grumbled when his grandfather rousted him out of bed before sunrise, he liked his new life and found little to complain about. He was afraid, however, of his grandparents' neighbor, Francis Wolcott, who lived a half mile down the road from them. Every afternoon, when the sun was westering and long shadows had begun to creep down the hillsides, Billy would watch from a window as Francis Wolcott, like a tall dark shadow, strode down the dusty road towards the grove of ash and chestnut trees at the end of the road. He lived in a cabin which he had let fall nearly to ruin, but he never wanted for anything. The farmers whispered that he was a witch, and feared him so much that they gave him pork, flour, meal, cider, or anything he might need. If they didn't, neighbors said, he would make a horse come to a dead halt in the middle of plowing, or make a man run around flapping his folded arms like wings and clucking like a chicken. But even worse, rumors said, was the fact that the old man could conjure up 13 night riders, demons straight from hell, when the moon was growing old. They would go anywhere he told them to and do all sorts of mischief. Whenever he heard about the demon riders, Billy felt a thrill of fear and an eagerness to see these creatures of the night, from a safe distance, of course. Wolcott never bothered Billy's grandparents. They were polite to the man when they met him in the lane, and thought the talk of witchery was so much foolishness. Good Christian folk should be about their business, and not wasting time scaring each other with such nonsense, declared Ann Mosby. But Billy kept an open mind. There was so much talk in the neighborhood, he couldn't believe everybody was wrong. He kept his thoughts to himself, however. He knew there was no arguing with his grandparents once their minds were made up. But Billy's curiosity about Francis Wolcott grew the more. Yeah. But Billy's curiosity about Francis Wolcott grew the more he tried not to think about the strange old man. I've got to see for myself, he decided one evening. So after his grandparents were asleep in the room, he slipped out of his bedroom window and ran down the road to Wolcott's cabin. A three-quarter moon overhead gave plenty of light to see by. But when he was near the dark cabin, Billy saw the old man open the front door. The boy ducked behind a bush. Peeking from behind some leaves, he saw that Wolcott was carrying bundles of oat straw in his arms. With a quick glance up and down the road, the shadowy figure headed towards the grove of ash and chestnut trees at the end of the lane. When it seemed safe, Billy followed. Something told him that tonight he would find out the truth about Wolcott's witchery. The man went directly to a clearing in the center of the grove. There he carefully laid out 13 bundles of oat straw in a circle. Standing inside this ring, Wolcott extended his arms and began to turn. Thank you for the hydrate. Much appreciated. Wolcott extended his arms and began to turn, muttering words that Billy, watching around the trunk of the chestnut tree, could not hear.
As the witch spun faster, the bundles of oat straw began to put off sprouts, so they looked as if they were growing into gnarly plants. But the roots quickly became horses' legs. The bundles themselves became the bodies of sleek black horses, and the strange blossoms became their heads and tails. Then a cloud passed across the moon, and the clearing was suddenly dark. When the moonlight returned, Billy saw that there was now a rider on the back of each horse. They were wrapped in black cloaks and had their broad brimmed hats drawn down so that the boy could see nothing of their faces. Quickly, Francis Wolcott began giving instructions to these mysterious horsemen, sending them off in different directions. Sometimes the night rider would go alone, sometimes two would gallop off together. When all but one had been sent away, Billy, leaning closer to try and hear what Wolcott was saying, stepped on a dry fallen branch that gave a loud snap. Instantly, the man at the center of the clearing came bounding across and grabbed the boy before he could run. Wolcott's hand was like a claw on Billy's shoulder as he hauled the boy into the clearing, where the last night rider silently waited. "Please don't hurt me," begged Billy. "I promise I won't tell."
"Tell whoever you please," said the man. "It doesn't matter a jot to me."
Then he fixed Billy with a thoughtful stare and stroked his chin.
"It might just be I could use a brave lad like you as an apprentice. You've got curiosity enough to kill a cat 9 times over, and you seem bright enough."
Now Wolcott was rubbing his hands together eagerly.
"Yes, you have all the makings of a fine apprentice. So we'll begin your lessons tonight. Since you're curious about my friend, ride with him a while and satisfy your curiosity."
Before Billy could even ask what an apprentice was, the old man picked him up with surprising strength and swung him onto the saddle, behind the shadowy rider.
"Now go!"
the old man yelled. Without a word, the rider urged his midnight steed to a trot and guided the animal out of the clearing to the road. Billy found he was stuck to the sleek black horse as though he was part of it. He glanced once over his shoulder and saw Francis Wolcott standing in the clearing watching him. The rider in front said nothing, but Billy felt him urging his horse to a gallop the moment they were free of the trees. In uncanny silence they rushed down the lane. The silky black cloak of the man in front of him whipped back around Billy, obscuring his view much of the time. The horses' hoofs made no sound on the rock-strewn roadway. The only sound was the wind rushing past the boy's ears. They raced like hurricanes across fields and through woods, leaping bushes, fences, even trees without effort. Billy lost track of time and distance. He began to think they were going to ride forever when they reached the gates of a farm Billy had never seen before. The house was quiet and dark. Reining his horse in front of the barn, the night rider cried,
"Tangle the horses' tails this night. Let the hogs all sing and dance upright."
The doors of the barn flew open, and two horses charged in the yard. They whinnied in terror, and Billy could see their tails were so twisted together that they began running in a circle, which only frightened them more. Behind them, in the shadows of the barn,
They saw the nightmarish forms of three pigs, squealing and prancing around on their hind legs as though they were trying to sing and dance. Lamps were lit in the farmhouse. Billy could hear shouts. The night rider wheeled his horse and galloped away from the farm. They traveled fast as a whirlwind through unfamiliar countryside. Long after the moon had set, Billy began to recognize landmarks. In the starlight, he saw that they were nearing the cluster of chestnut and ash trees where his adventure had begun. But at the very edge of the grove, Billy's rider suddenly vanished. The black horse turned into a bundle of oak straw under him, and he tumbled to the ground with a thump. He lay for a long time, just catching his breath. Then he got to his feet and grabbed the bundle of oat straw and ran to tell his grandparents what he had seen. Before he reached home, he looked at the oat straw and thought, "They'll never believe me." So he crept quietly back into bed and said nothing, though in his mind he relived the amazing night ride again and again. The next evening, sitting at the kitchen table helping his grandmother shell peas, Billy asked, "What's an apprentice?" "A beginner, a learner," Aunt Mosby answered. "A boy who works for someone so he can learn the man's trade." She looked at her grandson curiously. "You thinking of hiring yourself out to someone?" "No," said Billy. "I just heard the word somewhere, and I wondered what it meant." But as he worked at the peas, his mind began to race. He imagined what it might be like to wave his hands and have pigs dance in the moonlight, or bundles of old straw turn into night riders on magical horses. If he could ever get up the nerve, he thought, he might, just might, ask Francis Wolcott to make him an apprentice. It was a frightening thought, but it was also an exciting one. But there were no more stories of the 13 Night Riders after that. Though Billy eagerly watched the road past the farm. "Ah, welcome," the cat 1787. "Are those eyeballs on your jacket, Spider?" "Yes, this is, well, you could say it's a spider jacket, yes. Yes, it is. It is meant to be a very Halloween style jacket. The eyes are simply decoration on the coat. The eyes in the eye in my chest, less so." The cat, "So many eyes on us. Oh yes, better to keep a watch on all of you, my dear scholars." Though Billy eagerly watched the road past the farm, old Francis Wolcott, who was 90 years old, no longer visited the neighbors and took away the farmer's goods with him. The boy heard several people mutter, "He's died or gone to the devil, and not a moment too soon." No one would go near the silent, tumble-down cabin. When Billy suggested he and his grandparents should go take a look, Anne and Enoch told him to mind his own business. When his need to know what had happened, and his fear that he might never learn the secrets of night riding got the better of him, Billy slipped away one afternoon to the little house that looked completely deserted. He knocked several times. When a faint cry came from inside, the boy opened up the door. The cramped room inside smelled stale and sour. I know it's so early, but I need to go. Sorry, I hope you have a happy Halloween. And you as well. Thank you for coming. Pin, thank you. Oh, and thank you, the cat, for the follow. Welcome to our little
Band of scholars, welcome, welcome, welcome. It's wonderful to have you here. The cramped room inside smelled stale and sour. Old Francis Wolcott lay under a pile of filthy bedclothes on a cot in one corner. At first, Billy thought the old man was dead. His eyes were closed so tight, but they popped open, and Wolcott asked sharply, "What are you doing here, boy?" "Uh, well," Billy mumbled. "Speak up!" Francis Wolcott demanded. "I want to become your apprentice," the boy managed to get out. "Then you're a fool, boy," said the old man bitterly. "Why would you want to learn such things?" "I want to crawl up night riders of my own," Billy said eagerly. "I want to be able to turn people I don't like into chickens." "There's a price on such secrets, boy," whispered the old man, suddenly turning his head to watch the door. "There's a terrible price, which nobody should have to pay. But I'm going to, soon enough." "What do you mean?" asked Billy, wondering if maybe the old man had gone out of his head. "He's coming for me soon," croaked Francis Wolcott. "I'm dead, but I won't have any peace." "Maybe I'd better go get my grandfather," said Billy, frightened by the other's fear. He turned to go, but the old man grabbed his wrist with a clutch like a circle of iron. Billy heard a sudden clap of thunder, unexpected on what had been a pleasant summer day. Staring out the window, he saw rain pelting down from a sudden storm. In the shadows, the dying man's face had such a horrible look that Billy gave a small cry of alarm. With each peal of thunder, Wolcott trembled more and more. "He's coming," the old man said again, struggling to sit up in bed. Then he gave a cry and fell back on his pillow. Billy heard the loudest crash of thunder yet. Then over the sound of wind and rain he heard galloping hooves in the road. They stopped just outside the cabin. Francis Wolcott, terror-stricken, tightened his hold on the boy and tried to say something that Billy couldn't make out. The door was flung open, and a night rider stood like a monstrous shadow in the doorway. The old man gave a final strangulated cry. Then he let his hand drop limply away from Billy's wrist. There was a violent flash of lightning. For an instant, Billy caught a glimpse of the rider's face. He saw horns, skin the color of raw beef, and eyes that burned like coals. The room's smell of sulfur and the sound of rain on the roof was deafening. Then the figure strode to the bed, picked up the old man as if he weighed no more than a bundle of oat straw, and carried him through the door. The panels slammed behind them. There was a peal of thunder, then the sound of galloping hooves disappearing into the rain. But when Billy had calmed down enough to leave the cabin that now held only him, he found the road outside was dry. At home, he found his grandparents hadn't noticed any rain or heard any thunder. When he tried to tell them what he had seen, they scolded him for making up outlandish stories. Later, Anne asked her grandson, "You still deciding about becoming someone's apprentice?" "No, ma'am," said Billy. "Not now. Not ever." Yes, indeed. There is a price to pay for such dark secrets, are there not? And Francis Woolcott learned that price. Now we have two more stories before we end this frightening tale telling. I can hear the guests in the back feeling a little bit anxious. They too want to return to their party. So we have two stories of vengeance, one from beyond the grave, and one from an unknown source. The Skeleton's Revenge, Mexico. In the 17th century, in the village of Santiago near Mexico City, there lived a gentle old priest named Don Juan de Nava, who was much beloved by his neighbors. He labored selfishly to settle arguments, guide young people, help the poor, and teach the ways of God to rich and poor alike. At the time, Mexico City was situated on a large island, surrounded by lakes. Ah, Private Maverick's gotta go. Sleep before work. Night, and thanks for the stories. You are very welcome. Thank you for coming, Private Maverick. A raised road of packed earth, called a causeway, linked Santiago with the capital. Just outside the village, a water-filled ditch cut across the road. This broad gap was spanned by an old stone bridge, close to the simple house of Padre Juan. Here the old priest lived with his niece, Margarita, whose parents had died. She was a young lady of virtue, intelligence, and great beauty, and she was courted by all the young men of Santiago and Mexico City. As it happened, a wealthy young nobleman from the city, Don Duarte, fell madly in love with Margarita. In those days, courtships followed many rules, so the young couple could only exchange soft words, or roses, or little gifts through the iron grating of a window in Padre Juan's house. Sometimes Don Duarte strummed a guitar as he sang songs beneath Margarita's balcony. As he watched the growing affection between the two, Padre Juan took upon himself a father's responsibility for his orphan niece. Putting on his best cassock and sandals, he walked to Mexico City to learn what he could about Don Duarte. He wanted to be sure that the man would make a proper husband. But what he learned greatly upset Padre Juan. One and all told him that Don Duarte lived a shameless, wild life, mocked the laws of God and man, and had broken the hearts of many women, from serving girls to the daughters of the finest families. Heavy-hearted, Padre Juan returned home, where he told his niece that she must have nothing more to do with the young man. That very night, through her window grill, the weeping Margarita told her suitor that her uncle would not allow them to marry. At this, Don Duarte made such dreadful threats against her uncle that she covered her ears and ran to her bedroom. Now, Don Duarte was not a man to give up easily, and he was determined to wed the lovely Margarita. So one night he waited on the old stone bridge. When Padre Juan returned from visiting an ailing farmer, the young man begged the priest to talk with him. The priest, always anxious to believe that there was hope for every sinner, listened as the young man promised to mend his ways. He swore that he would prove a loving and respectful husband, if only the priest would permit him to wed Margarita. But Padre Juan, who had seen the best and worst in the human heart,
felt that the words which came so easily to the young man were lies. He sensed that there was no honesty, no love, no change in Don Duarte. Even Padre Juan's generous heart recoiled from what he saw of the man's true nature. Politely but firmly, the priest refused Don Duarte's pleading. Seeing that his appeal had failed, and enraged to think he might lose the woman he had set his heart upon, Don Duarte drew his dagger and plunged it almost to the hilt into the skull of Padre Juan. Without a sound, the old priest fell dead upon the stones of the bridge. Because the dagger with its ornate handle would easily be recognized as his, Don Duarte began to pull on it, but no matter how hard he tugged, he could not budge the blade. Frantic to hide his crime, he tossed the body with the dagger, still in place, off the bridge and into the water. Then he fled into the night. The disappearance of Padre Juan caused a great stir throughout the Valley of Mexico. Santiago and the countryside were searched, but no trace of the priest were found. Don Duarte, knowing that he could not approach Margarita during the time of mourning, gave himself over even more completely to his reckless, wicked life. But thoughts of Margarita inflamed him. He decided he would visit her. If he could not persuade her to run away with him, he would carry her off. Don Duarte returned to Santiago on a stormy night. Heavy clouds were split by bursts of lightning. Rain began to fall in great drops as Don Duarte, his cloak wrapped tightly about him, splashed along the rain-slick causeway. When he reached the stone bridge, he heard a strange, scraping noise ahead of him. But try as he might, he could see nothing in the rain-swept darkness. Then a flash of lightning revealed a tall skeleton wrapped in a torn and soaked cassock, coming towards him, step by step. Sticking out of the skull at a grotesque angle was the murderer's now rusty dagger. Don Duarte turned to flee, but it was too late. At dawn, a farmer crossing the bridge on his way to market found a gruesome sight. Sprawled in a puddle where the body of was the body of Don Duarte, an expression of absolute terror on his face. Beside his body, its bony hands locked around his throat, was a weather-beaten skeleton, still clothed in a tattered cassock. A rusty dagger jutted out of its skull, and its jaws were frozen in a horrible grin. I would think that Don Duarte got his just desserts, wouldn't you agree? And now for our final story of this evening. A classic tale, and one sure to chill your spine.
Talipo, United States, West Virginia. Not so very long ago, an old man lived by himself in the backwoods of West Virginia. He had a log cabin with a single room that held a stove, a bed, a table, a chair, and a big open fireplace built of fieldstone. One night the man sat eating a plate full of beans and bread and regretting he hadn't been able to catch a single fish in the lake behind his cabin, or bag a single possum or deer for his supper. He was startled to look across the table and see the strangest creature he had ever seen, sitting on its haunches in the far corner of the room, staring at him. It had jaws like a weasel, ears like a fox, piercing yellow eyes like an owl, and a monkey's body, and was covered in bright red fur. But mainly it had a huge long tail that coiled around and around it, the way a rattler coils on itself before it strikes. "What the?" cried the man. "How'd you get in here?" He grabbed his carving knife from beside the loaf of bread and went after the animal. The thing gave a screech like nothing the man had heard before. Then it scrambled out through a chink between two of the cabin's logs. But it wasn't quick enough. With a single slice, the man cut the creature's tail off, while the rest of the animals scampered away to the woods. The man walked back to the table and stretched out the tail, marveling at its length. After a few minutes, he decided that meat was meat, and that was what he was hungry for right now. So he cooked up that tail, found it tasted a little like rabbit, and ate it all at one sitting. After that, he plugged up the hole between the logs, went to bed, and soon was fast asleep. He hadn't been asleep very long when he heard something scratching at the door, just like a cat. Pretty soon he heard it call, "Talipo, Talipo, just give me my Talipo." Now he had 3 dogs that slept under the house. He whistled for them, and they came charging out and chased the creature far into the woods. But only 2 of his dogs came back. When the man saw this, he cursed a blue streak. Then he sent the dogs to sleep under the floorboards and went back to bed himself. A short time later, he heard the same clawing at the front door as the creature tried to get in. Then he heard it call through a crack in the door, "Talipo, Talipo, just give me my Talipo." Once again the man whistled up his dogs from underneath the cabin, and they chased the creature all the way down the road, snapping so close behind that if it had still had a tail, it would have lost it to the hounds. The man heard the dogs giving chase until the woods swallowed up the sound. But a little later, only 1 dog returned. Again, the man cursed loudly. This time he had his remaining dogs sleep at the foot of his bed. In the smallest hour of the morning, he heard something scrambling at the window, like a night bird trying to get in.
Through the cracked glass he heard, "Tailipo! Tailipo! I've got to have my Tailipo!" Quick as he could, he flung the cabin door open and sent his last dog out into the night. He heard the dog charging around the corner of the cabin and heard the creature screeching and scrambling away. After that, things were pretty quiet. But the last hound never did return. The man stayed awake a long time, listening, but he heard nothing more. Finally, just before dawn, he fell asleep. But he woke up a few minutes later. He was sure he'd heard something in his room. He looked into the far corner and saw the patch he'd put over the hole was gone. Then he heard something scrambling up the foot of his bed. A minute later, he saw a fox's ears, a weasel's jaw, and two huge yellow eyes, just like an owl's, looking at him. He tried calling for his dogs, but they were gone. He was too frightened to climb out of bed. He just kept staring, while the red monkey-like creature crept closer and closer.
Tailipo, Tailipo,
It growled.
just give me my Tailipo.
But, the man stuttered. I haven't got your Tailipo. Then the horrible creature, which was by then sitting on the man's knees, snarled and said,
Yes, you have.
and it jumped on the man's chest and scratched him all to pieces. There are those who say the creature got its Tailipo back, and some who say it didn't. But the fact is, that old man and his dogs were never seen again in West Virginia or anywhere else. Yes, indeed. I suppose you could say, be careful what you eat. Oh, I'm being terribly corny. Maestro, you can resume your playing of music, please. I'm sure the guests are eager. Dr. Zadium, that was a tasty tale. Yes, in more ways than one, I suppose. Oh dear, I should not laugh of such things. Ah, yes. Tony, love that story, the way you tell it. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. I love telling that story. Yes. And now I can see it is getting quite late for some. And I want to, suppose I'm being asked to mingle among the guests of the party. So, unfortunately, I suppose I should close out for now. But it would be rude of me not to visit another. So I think tonight Ah, I see Alchemist is playing a bit of Splatoon 3. I think we shall raid her tonight and visit her. Ah, looks like she's playing Fall Guys instead. Oh, well, I think we should raid her for tonight then. We'll see. We'll end this Halloween tale with something a little bit more enjoyable. So I must say to you, my dear scholars, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Till we meet again. I shall see you next time at the study. Until then, take care, farewell, and good evening, and may I say, pleasant dreams. Excuse me. Ah, dear. See you then.